Phil Coorey, on the mining tax, as compromises go, how would you rate that one?
I think it was a decent one. It reminded me what Howard said when the Democrats took a bite out of his GST. He said, you know, you get 80% of something's better than 100% of nothing. From a political standpoint, it's a win because it shuts down an issue, and you know, I think at the end of the day they're still gouging $10.5 billion out of the miners that they otherwise weren't going to get. So I think you'd have to give the points to Gillard.
Yeah, but that's sometimes forgotten in all of this when you argue about all of the detail. That in fact this is a brand new revenue stream.
It's a lot of money that Labor was keen on, and but I think the selling of it was extraordinarily successful, but also, unfortunately, an extension of the Rudd-type spin. Now, we were told that this deal cost the government only $1.5 billion over the forward estimates, so the first 2 years of the tax. In fact, it's much, 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 much more than that.
Further down the track?
No, even in the forward estimates, because the way it had already been set up, it seems that it had not factored in a lot of windfall gains. Now, Foreign Minister Stephen Smith admitted that yesterday, that there were a lot of windfall gains, more than they were expecting. That's in part from an increase in resource prices, and Phil was talking about this, I think, a month ago, was about the first onto it. But it's also, I think, another botched estimates or costing from Treasury.
Well, if it is a windfall gain, they might need some of that as they readjust anyway. I mean, Martin
so.
Ferguson put quite a few things on the table,
yeah,
left a few things on the table.
Tweak a bit with some of the small miners, but I think just prima facie, they landed with about 90% of what they started with. They've managed to, you know, I know what Andrew's making that point, that there was all this, and we do sort of know that there's all this extra revenue that we didn't really know about, but suspected was there and gave them more room to be flexible. But at the end of the day, what they announced and what they ended up with isn't vastly different.
Oh, hang on, wait a minute. It only applies to two mineral exports. It excludes a couple of hundred...
No, but I mean with the end result. The revenue you make and the measures you fund with it.
Well, but also the effective tax, the headline tax. Now, they sold it as 30%, they wanted 40, sold as 30, it's effectively 22.5. I mean, this is part of the whole spin machine.
And that was a significant change. And let's hear from Andrew Forrest, who claimed that, in fact, they were close to a deal under Kevin Rudd. Here he is.
We had reached a set of points which I think the Prime Minister was happy with, which the mining industry would have been prepared to discuss, and that was all taken off the table before it could be announced. It was going to be done on a very open basis, and that just got wiped by the factional heads in the Labor Party.
But Malcolm, the 40% was still on the table. What's he talking about?
I'm not sure. He didn't explain fully, did he? And I think the last element that had to be negotiated, the key to it all, was the 40% and associated tax movements. It was put under the mining companies put it under the umbrella of international competitiveness, which essentially said, don't tax us out of business globally. And they reached this compromise. And we're talking about three of the world's biggest miners, not just big in Australia, big internationally. And they feel as comfortable, I guess, as they're ever going to feel with that 30%.
The word that Julie Gillard kept coming back to was respect. She said there was more respect from the government for the miners and vice versa. Let's hear from Julie Gillard and Wayne Swan.
I'm a pretty frank person. I'm not afraid of a difficult conversation, but I believe you best take people with you. If you sit round a table and work out how much you can agree, how much you have to have an argument about, and if it's capable of being settled, then you work through it, get the best job done, take things forward. That's exactly what we've done.
Could I just congratulate the Prime Minister on the role that she has played in this very important discussion and negotiation. I think it's fair to say that her intervention changed the tone of this debate and has led to this breakthrough.
Now, see, they say that her intervention changed the whole tone, therefore she gets ticks for it.
The fixer.
Had Kevin Rudd came up with the same solution...
But he couldn't. That was the trouble.
Yeah,
Rudd had
because he'd been compromised on back-downs.
He was so locked in. There was two things he could not back down on. There was the 40% rate and the application to existing projects, what was called retrospectivity. And he knew, and we all knew, and they were telling everyone that he was already under the pump for backing down on the ETS, and one more big cave-in and he was toast. So Gillard wasn't bound by those same restrictions, so she was able to do what he could never do.
There's one other thing I think worked in her favour, though, Phil, and that is merely by the change of leader, Labor's chances of winning the election were improved. And for the miners, that changed the game again.
Yeah. They knew they were going to get a Labor government.
They were
with
going to get a Labor
Senate.
government which would remember and which would not have the imperative of a looming election to cut a deal. They really didn't. No one needed to cut a deal.
And you'd have a Senate run by the Greens too.
And
So this thing was going to go
That's exactly
through.
right. They didn't need a deal with the miners.
Martin Ferguson's point as well, that nothing concentrates the mind like sacking a Prime Minister. I mean, you're sitting across the table from people who have just sacked a Prime Minister, so you better get on with it.
What are they going to do to me?
Tony Abbott now, just how exposed is he on this? Not as far as he is concerned. Let's hear from him.
Let's be absolutely clear about this. The next election is a referendum on tax. Labor supports a great big new tax on mining. The Coalition doesn't. As simple as that. Labor needs the tax because it's addicted to spending. The Coalition isn't. The alternatives are sharp and clear. Labor wants a great big new tax. The Coalition doesn't. And I welcome the next election as a referendum on tax.
Now, isn't the weakness to that is that the mining companies have agreed to pay an extra $10.5 billion, but Tony Abbott's saying, no, we don't want it, we don't want you paying that extra tax, and we'll go to the people of Australia and make a case. How's that going to work?
It's a very hard sell because he's turning his back on the money for a start. It's not like he's clean on this himself. He's proposing a tax or a levy to fund his parental leave scheme. And really, one of the arts of taxation is to simply find someone willing enough to hand over the cash that you want. And if the miners say yes, it's a bit hard to tell. Now, their argument's going to be, it may be in the interest of the miners to sign up to this, but it's not in the national interest. I think that's an argument that's worth having, but I'm not sure it's one that's going to
Can you really see him making this, though, front and centre issue in the campaign, or will he just slowly drift away from it?
Drift away like rollback, won't it? I mean, but he sort of painted himself in the corner as much as Rudd did at the outset. You know, I will fight to my last political breath. Remember that line, to stop this thing. And at that stage they had all the miners on side advertising and helping them, and this wasn't meant to happen. So Abbott's really left himself not a lot of out here either. So
it was a successful strategy as long as Kevin Rudd was Prime Minister, and in fact it killed him. But now I think...
A bit premature.
I think they should say, well, if the miners sign up to that, you might argue on the side, but it's a lot of money to be saying no to.
I mean, he could spend it on something else. He could say, OK, if we do it,
it's still a tax.
Scrap his levy for a start, and I think...
Exactly. I mean, how can you say that... these people are only going to cut company tax by 1%. I'm going to increase it by 1.7%. How can you argue that tax is the issue?
Which is a difference of 2.7.
Yeah, but there still is an argument, of course, to be said that if you please the miners, I mean, they've got options. They really wanted to protect the assets they had in the country that were already existing. And it's of less interest, perhaps, future investments in Australia. They've got options overseas. So I guess there's an argument to run as to whether something that's in the interest of the miners is necessarily in the interest of the country. But I just think...
But it was before. I mean, the miners were the be-all and end-all, the economic spine of Australia. But you can't suddenly say, well, actually, they're self-serving foreign interests.